So some of you guys might not actually like this, but I've decided that I'm gonna actually pick up the Sony FX3. Now, in other videos that I've been testing it, I didn't actually own it, but I'm thinking I might actually make this kind of a full-time relationship, even so much so that I might actually move on from the Sony FX30 and I guess make an upgrade, but we'll explain. Now, before I get into this video, it's not because I think full frame is better than APS-C sensors. In fact, there's a lot of evidence to prove that it's not that big of a deal, and it's definitely not because the creator was shot on the FX30 and I want to jump on that SEO train because I kind of don't really care anymore. Now, there's a couple of reasons, and actually just three, that made me kind of want to go to the FX3 instead of the FX30, or at the very least kind of move on from one to the other. Now, the first thing is going to be the low light performance, and I've done actually two different videos comparing the low light between a lot of the latest Sony cameras, and just the full frame sensors are going to be better at light gathering. And also on the FX3, you also have a 12,800 ISO option as well. Now, for the most part, and I've already said this before, is that you don't necessarily need it all the time. However, I'm going to a place where I don't have control over my own lighting. At the time of this video, and in about 3 weeks, I'm going to be taking a trip to Ghana, West Africa, and I'm going to be there for about a month. I might make a little bit of content here and there, but I just want to have a camera that I could use at all times. Now, the low light on the FX30 is decent, but on the 12,800 side of things, given the option to pick between the two, well, I'm gonna pick the better option. Now, the thing with going to Ghana, especially someone that's not a local, I can't bring all my lights with me. And my main suggestion of just bringing light with you and lighting your scenes and going through the steps of cinematography to control your situation, I don't have the opportunity to do that because I'm not from Ghana and I'm not bringing a Nanlite 720B on a plane. Now, there is another part about Ghana that you might not know, and the fact that the sunset's actually quite early. As a country that's super close to the equator, it's not going to be surprising when it's pitch dark outside at about 5 p.m. And I might still want to shoot a vlog, or I still might want to shoot something, and I don't want to lose that amount of light and then have to try to rush home and figure things out, or have to deal with a little bit of noise that you might get out of the FX30 with a smaller sensor and a little bit less of an ISO performance even at its high base. Now, you could make do, you could use noise reduction, you could bring a little light with you in your pack, but I find that having the 12,800 in that particular situation, an uncontrolled environment where it is going to get a little bit darker, I'm going to end up picking that as an option, and I have the option to pick that, so, well, I'm going to bring this guy with me and I'm going to be able to use it for the duration of my trip. The second part is actually going to be the ecosystem itself, and the fact that having something that's going to be a similar sensor makes it a little bit easier to carry a little bit less kit. Now, as someone that's tested out a ton of different lenses, a ton of different cameras, there's a ton of different just camera gear in my house, and some of it I kind of need to sell. I actually miss photography out of all the things that I actually don't have in my kit. Now, I sold my Sony a7 IV like 6 months ago when I was picking up the red Komodo X, and I haven't actually had a photography camera since. Now, the FX3 can take 12 megapixel photos, and this FX30 can actually take 20 something megapixel photos, but this is going to be a little bit different. You're not going to get a fully functioned photocentric camera, which is something that I feel like is a little bit of a hole that I've been missing over the last little bit. When I went to Condo a couple of months ago, I used the Sony a7C Mark II and a couple of different lenses, and I really liked, and I actually really started to miss the photography side of things, even if it's not something that's going to be directly for client work. And now I'm kind of tossing up between getting an a7 IV again or getting another photo camera in the Sony lineup, but the Sony photo cameras that are a little bit more photocentric, a lot of them are going to be full frame sensors outside of the a6700 that came out this year. And one thing that I'm considering is picking up one of these full frame photo cameras, and with that you're going to need full frame photo glass, or you're just going to need full frame glass in general. Now, you can use full frame glass on crop sensor cameras. I've done it before and it works fine, but you do have to do a little bit of math, and if I have the option to afford the ability to do that, well then I'm just not going to make that choice. And having something like the FX3 means I could just keep one set across the board, and I know exactly the focal length or at least the field of view that I'm going to get depending on what camera I'm going to use, because it's all going to be the same thing more or less. Also, the a7C Mark II has some fancy features in AI, which is actually really cool as well. One of the things about the full frame lineup is going to have ecosystem implications, and sometimes, and a lot of times, full frame lenses are going to be expensive and more expensive than their crop sensor counterparts. However, if you're you're in a position that's super blessed and privileged like myself, you could kind of make that switch and it's not the biggest deal in the world. And the third thing, and this is also kind of a more personal thing, not necessarily a thing everybody's gonna have, but I don't think I gave the FX3 a decent shot. Now, at one point, I did have an FX6, an FX3, and an A7 IV. My A7 IV is for my pro photo work. I use my FX3 to work on client work, especially people that have YouTube channels, and I didn't want to use an FX6 to do that. And then I have my FX6 for some of my other clients as a freelancer that I used for that purpose. And a lot of times, the FX3 kind of felt like it was a little bit in the back burner because in a lot of situations, I never needed it and the FX6 at the same time, especially if I'm only going to be by myself shooting on one camera. So the FX3 over time just became a kind of overkill YouTube setup, but albeit I worked with YouTube clients that paid quite a bit. So it always just became something that I never really got to push its limits because I never felt the need to, because I had an FX6 which had the same sensor, albeit there was more things in it than the FX3 at the time. And I kind of felt like over time I stopped kind of needing the FX3 because I had the 6 and for everything else I had the A7 IV, that I kind of just got rid of it last summer and I never turned back, but I also didn't get to use it to its full capabilities. Now, not having the FX6 and my Red Komodo X is definitely not used for everything. The FX30 is great for YouTube. I kind of want to give the FX3 the same kind of shot because maybe there was things that I loved about the FX3 that I might have not fully acknowledged because where I positioned it in terms of my kit and in my workflow. But obviously things have changed and I want to kind of give it a little bit of time to explore it, have a little bit more fun, albeit it's going to be a very similar experience to the FX30, but because of the other two reasons, it might work a little bit more in my workflow depending if I do decide to get things like a photography camera and get photo glass, or when dealing with stuff in Canada or dealing with stuff close to the equator, sun's gonna set really early, and that means that it's gonna get dark a lot earlier than it usually would, which also means that having a camera with high ISO performance is gonna be the thing that you might wanna have on you. Now, I'm sure there's gonna be somebody in the comments that's gonna talk about some sort of commentary about the whole switching cameras culture, especially in regards to YouTube, but in my honest opinion, I kind of just like using different things, and I think what ends up happening is a lot of people, 99% of people, don't get the opportunity where they're in the position to try a bunch of new forms of technology. Obviously, being on YouTube and working with companies like Sony Canada, who lets me borrow a bunch of different lenses to test out before I buy them, or in some cases actually get to borrow cameras, like that time I have the Sony Venice. You get to do a lot of things of a privilege to find out what you like and what you don't like. And you get to do it from a primary source. You get to do it where I get to go physically use those things and figure those things out. And then if I find out they're not for me, or I just change my mind, I could do that and it doesn't cost me anything. It doesn't take a lot from me. And at the same time, because you spend so much time with cameras, the idea that you're not spending a lot of time with the gear that you have before moving on, I would argue that a lot of these camera nerds spend a ton of time with their cameras. Now, are they going out and shooting Hollywood movies and shooting commercial campaigns? Probably not. And I think there's still viability in most cameras. So I think using that as an argument doesn't always hold up as well as it does. But at the same time, I'm in a position where I get to try new things and get to tell you about those things and maybe get things for myself, or maybe my workflow changes because realistically my freelance life and YouTube and just life itself has changed in a drastic way 4 to 5 times this year, and a lot of the gear that I keep kind of changes with it, which for some people that might not understand that. They might not understand when your freelance situation changes a little bit, or your YouTube channel goes up by 500% and now brand deals are your clients now, or you move from one end of the city to the other and your jobs change. Like, there's so many things that happen where having also the ability to try new kit and switch over your kit to accommodate for those situations is a blessing for me, and some people might not have. But I think some people look at people moving from camera to camera or moving from lens to lens as a thing that they're recommending that you should do, instead of just topical advice in case you experience the same things. And me going from the FX30 to the FX3 is just one of those things. It's just a situation that I'm in now. I'm going to a different country and I want to bring the tools to give the best experience that I can, so I can either make more content, work with new clients, work with new brand deals, or just share the experience with you guys. But that's just my 2 cents about the whole switching camera things. However, this is going to be kind of a new format, kind of like a super fan Sunday. I don't expect it to get a ton of views. I don't expect it to get a ton of traction, but I talk a lot and there's some things I feel like just getting off my chest. So let me know in the comment section down below how you kind of like this new format. There's not a lot of cuts, not a lot of B-roll, but I kind of like this format, and we'll be doing it once a week. So I'll see you guys next Sunday. Peace.